Further on in his letter, Paul speaks again of the tradition. Now we beg you, friends, in the name of our Lord Jesus, to keep your distance from those who live lives that have no purpose, who do not live according to the tradition that we have passed on to you. In more traditional corners of our land, families will visit graves today or tomorrow, bringing flowers to father and mother, maybe sisters and brothers, grandparents, fuss about the graves a bit, think long thoughts a while, then go off to other activities of the holiday weekend. We will go to Michigan to do that. On certain of the graves, we will see flags marking those who have given their lives for this great country. And we will remember. Memories are important. The irony is, I think they become increasingly important during those years of life when we are less good at it. I've always wondered whether I'm less able to remember or whether I just have that much more to remember. I've noticed with my computer that the more stored in memory, the longer it takes for me to pull something up. Maybe no less with a human being. The names are the real challenge, though, aren't they? Have you ever had trouble with the name of someone that you've known for years and it simply escapes you? Quirky memories like mine of the fellow who said, "The reason I have such a wonderful memory for names is because I took that Sam Carnegie course." Certainly, when it does begin to go, it is no joke. Nothing is sadder than the elderly relative, confused and failing, who cannot remember who you are or where they are, dislocated because of loss of the capacity. But there are at least two critical dimensions of memory that are absolutely essential to any life worth living, and I want to lift them up this morning. First of all, our memories, so far as they remain vivid and lively, tell us who we are. As members of families, members of this nation, members of the Christian community and faith, it is an illusion of modernity that we have any real identity and meaning as individuals outside the context of historic communities that have shaped us and which bind us to the past in memory. A community of national heritage and history, communities of blood and long-term friendships, communities of faith extending back over the centuries, communities, all of them built on memory. And when we belong to them and share in them, we know who we are and why we are here this morning. I wonder if it is not loss of such memory that lies behind the breakdown of community in our time, with the consequences that life for many human beings has become isolated, solitary, without any ties to past or neighbor or a larger world in their own. Such life becomes desolate of any dependencies, any strength, any hope beyond the autonomous self. Professor of philosophy at an Eastern university, a brilliant man who had studied widely abroad, a man of acute sophistication and learning, was typically a kind of agnostic, refusing to commit to any system of thought or way of life, lest it destroy his independence. When his second child was only a few months old, he took ill with a bad fever, and the child was placed in the hospital, and because after a few days mother was exhausted, the father sent the mother home and stayed overnight in the child's room. And as he sat there in the dark, feeling helpless for one of the few times in his life, his mind wandered from one thing to another, and he began to ask himself about the direction of his own life, what he was in fact living for. And then finally, in the midst of the worry and loneliness and darkness, he began to hum an old Sunday school hymn. You know, it's dangerous to learn these old Sunday school hymns. They can come back to haunt you sometimes. "O Jesus, I have promised to serve thee to the end." He writes over and over, that simple song out of the past rang in my head until finally I found myself saying, "Oh God, I did promise, but I've let the years and the learning draw me far away. In searching for the truth with a little t, I've lost the truth of life." And he made then and there a surrender to the God of his early years, he says, and there came a wonderful sense of relief and peace and direction. His daughter recovered and a few days later was out of the hospital, but he said, that was not the heart of the issue for me that night. Of course, I wanted her well, but it was the realization in those dark hours of what really counted in life. The faith of my childhood remembered, reached out and took hold of me and made me whole again. And I found my way back to the place and the people where I belong. Memory gives me not only a sense of meaning and belonging, it also evokes a sense of obligation for who I am and what I have. An old man used to visit a broken pier on the seacoast of Florida, an ancient pier, every Friday night, in fact, until his death in 1973. He would go there slowly and slightly stooped with the years with a bucket of shrimp, and the seagulls would come to this old man and he would feed them. Many years before, in 1942, Captain Eddie Rickenbacker was on a mission in a B-17 to deliver a message to General Douglas MacArthur. Somewhere over the South Pacific, the Flying Fortress became lost. Fuel dangerously low, the men ditched the plane in the ocean. And for over a month, Captain Eddie and his companions would fight the water and the scorching sun, spending many sleepless nights as giant waves threatened their raft. But of all their most formidable enemies, the worst was the possibility of starving there. Their rations were long gone, and it would take a miracle to sustain them. In Captain Eddie's own words, the pilot, William Cherry, read a service from the Book of Common Prayer, a prayer for deliverance and a hymn. And he says, in the oppressive heat, with my hat pulled down over my eyes to keep off the glare, I dozed off. Something landed on my head, and I knew that it was a seagull. I don't know how I knew, I just knew. Everyone's eyes were on that seagull. Food, if only I could catch it. And the bird sat there calm and still as I slowly reached up and captured it in my hands. And the rest is history. They ate the flesh, the first food they'd had in many, many days, and they used the intestines for bait to catch fish. Their bodies were sustained and their hopes renewed because a lone seagull, uncharacteristically, hundreds of miles from land, had offered itself. And Rickenbacker never forgot. And so, to be sure, he always remembered. He created his own little ritual or sacrament of remembrance. Ever since, about sunset on a Friday evening on a lonely stretch along the eastern Florida seacoast, until he died, you could have seen an old man walking, white-haired, bushy-eyebrowed, slightly bent, his bucket full of shrimp for the gulls, to remember the one who gave itself for his life. As he put it, like manna in the wilderness, a gift from God. Only as you and I remember the gifts, the good fortune, the generous moments, the small miracles, above all the people, the mother and father and teachers and mentors, friends now gone, and all the unknown who gave their lives that our lives might go on as a people. Only as we remember do we sense the deep indebtedness that goes with real life. Memory binds me, it obligates me. A world of instability and discontinuity, of rootlessness, of loss of place and community, in self-absorption, is a world devoid of a sense of obligation. The late Christopher Lasch wrote, "To live for the moment is the prevailing passion and message, to live for yourself and not for your predecessors or your posterity. We are fast losing. We are the sense of belonging to a succession of generations, originating in the past and stretching out into the future. It is the waning of our sense of historical time and obligation that distinguishes the spiritual crisis of our time." But how do we remember to remember? That seems to be the trick, isn't it? The modern idea that we can ignore the rituals of remembrance, the traditions by which historic communities, whether family or church or nation, are created and sustained and may still stay alive to the gift and responsibility, that we can ignore these. I'm afraid television doesn't help much here. Charles Krauthammer, the well-known columnist, writes, "The ultimate instrument for forgetting is television. It's inherent in the medium. The flickering images are impossible to retain. Who remembers the once ubiquitous Mike Douglas, Frank Reynolds, Michael Dukakis? Pastlessness is inherent in the video, with its fast cuts and dissolving shots, and re-record button with its moving tape, forever recording a vanishing now. For a television society, every day is today, this morning, tonight." Sarah Harold Banks writes of stopping by the restaurant that is the gathering place for the town regulars in the small southern town she calls home. By the way, you can find the same restaurant in Whitehall, Michigan, where we summer, and I'll wager 1,000 other small towns scattered around the country. As I sat there listening, I wondered why the conversation among these people, the sound of it, gave such a feeling of security and place. And then I thought that perhaps it was a reminder of my childhood evenings before the advent of air conditioning, when people still sat on porches to enjoy the cool at the end of the day. And then the sound of adult voices meant security and order. Stories were told in soft voices, family stories mostly, usually beginning with, do you remember the time when Dad went all the way out to Kansas one summer to work in the wheat fields while he was working his way through Ole Miss? And there was a litany of familiar names: Nan and Swan, Edward and Lettice, Alex and Bertie, Margaret and Grace and Anne. Names like beads counted over and over until they were polished and shining with use. And you knew as you listened that all knowledge was there, like a cup, and shining. Now with air conditioning and television, no one sits on porches anymore. Neighbors don't wander over on warm, honeysuckle-scented nights to talk. Family stories aren't told as often, and children don't have that same sense of belonging, of knowing who they are and where they fit. For a little while that morning in the restaurant, as I listened to the casual, easy talk of the people, I was taken back. For just a little while, I felt that ease, that sense of security, that all knowledge was there, held and caught like fireflies in a mason jar, a small light illuminating my darkness. But you see, where's the front porch and the moments of gathering in our lives today? There can be little sense of who we are and whose we are outside of the rehearsal, again and again, of strong memories. And what are our birthdays and anniversaries and the observances of Memorial Day and the 4th of July? What are the worship and sacraments of the church, if rightly observed, but a time of remembering where we came from and to whom we belong? Paul writes to his friends in Thessalonica who are struggling with life in an alien environment, where the world around them seems on a slippery slope and they feel like nobodies, are tempted to give up in despair. Brothers and sisters, stand firm, hold fast to the traditions that you were taught by us. Traditions? These are the collective communal memory of where we all came from, and therefore who we are and to whom we belong. If we live only from little transient memories of yesterday's problems and the market on Friday, we live in a small, small world. If we live in the large world of God's story of us all, we grow as great as the story. This is why in worship and church school and Bible study, we basically do what? We rehearse stories, Christian stories, family stories, national stories, hand them on as mind-shaping memories for us and our children to live in and from. Because it is such memories, revived and rehearsed, that makes the past truly present to sustain us, give us importance and purpose. I don't know where you get your strength to go on, your renewal of spirit. I get it from remembering. There's a lot of garbage back there that needs to be forgotten and can be forgotten. But there's also a lot of encouraging faces and inspiring moments waiting to be conjured up and relived. To remember my life is to remember countless times when I might have given up, gone under, when humanly speaking, I might have gotten lost beyond the power of anybody to help me, but I did not give up. And each of you, with all the memories you have and the tales you could tell, you did not give up either. I know that because you're here. And what does that tell us? It tells us that weak as we are, a strength beyond our strength has pulled us through at least this far, at least to this day. So it is possible to find peace and strength by looking back and remembering to remember that though most of the time we failed to see it, we were never really alone. I try myself to live out of this perspective. It has been as those who are part of my past, who are remembered again and again, it is then that they become present, no longer part of the past. Certainly God is present to us whether we sense it or not, and certainly for all I know, those whom we have loved are. But it's only in remembering that I open the door so that they can be here again, now, speaking, guiding, encouraging. All these of my past, living and dead, become part of my present tense. Say to me by their struggle and their frailty, but also their courage and faith, it can be done. You too can run with patience the race that is set before you. If you stop and think about it, the names are many, aren't they? Some of them mark the stones out there in the churchyard. For me, some are in far-off Michigan graves. For all of us, some far-off foreign reaches of this earth. And some of the names sit here this morning. But remembered, they become present and alive. They say to us, you're not alone. With us, you too can rise above the common, the ordinary, and reach for a life that is rich and noble and Jesus-like in the years that are yet yours. So he said at his meal, do this remembering me. And he's not appealing for nostalgia. He is saying, allow me to be present again to your mind and spirit, even now. So perhaps we can simply use the little time we have left to be quiet and to remember him and all those who've peopled our lives with beautiful pictures of what it means to follow him. Such a simple thing, yet so rare in our time. Just remembering him and them one by one, and so taking heart and giving thanks and living again. Amen.